Good evening and welcome to a special edition of Face the Nation. I'm Sonali Wanigabatuke. I'd like to start off this program with a poem from Daniel Coffin. The female urge, out, to become a chameleon, to shrink, to wear uncomfortable clothes, to smile, to pretend the joke is funny, to apologize, to say I'm fine, to juggle, to worry, to sacrifice, to do it all, to swallow rage, to have a nervous breakdown, to fall apart, to hold on. In, to be a bit much, to expand, to wear sweatpants, to scowl, to have the nerve, to speak up, to be offended, to ask for help, to relax, to stop trying so hard, to rebel, to claim joy, to rebuild, to let go. I'm so pleased to be in the presence of 5 fabulous guests representing different disciplines and professions. Let me start off by introducing my first guest for tonight. She's Ermiza Tegal, lawyer and rights advocate. Good evening and welcome, Ermiza.
Thank you.
We're also joined by Bimali Ameresekere, National Program Analyst, Gender, UNFPA. Welcome to the show.
Hello.
My third guest tonight is Deepanjalie Abeywardana, Head of Verite Media Division and Deputy Director, Verite Research. Hi and welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Welcoming back to the studio, Professor Piyanjali de Zoysa, Clinical Psychologist and Senior Professor at the University of Colombo. Welcome. And last but not least, Dr. Kaushalya Ariyarathne, Member of Parliament and Attorney at Law. Welcome. I will also be joined by Naveksha and Teruni, who will be asking all the right questions. Now, to start things off, Sri Lanka's female representation in Parliament increased from 5.3% to 9.7% with the election of 22 female members in November 2024, including Sri Lanka's third Prime Minister. Sri Lanka is also looking to hold local government elections, which were continually delayed, to appoint people's representatives to 336 local government institutions. Now, a 25% female quota has been mandated by the statute, but is a statute alone sufficient to ensure meaningful political acumen, literacy engagement, or will we see a trend of women being used as puppets by fathers, brothers, sons, and husbands who are holding power de facto? I'd like to come to you, Dr. Kaushalya, with this question. How can the government ensure meaningful female participation? It has been one of the pledges of your government to ensure meaningful, equitable political participation by women. How do you think you're going to manage to do that?
First of all, I must thank for inviting me. Last year also I came here for the same program, Face the Nation, on Women's Day, but in a different capacity. So most probably, I think I represented an activist. Mm-hmm. But this year, after 1 year, the things have changed, and now I'm representing the government. But I must say that I'm happy to be here representing government, because I think I'm now in a position where I can contribute to change things that I've been advocating for so long. Mm-hmm. So in a position. This government, as you said correctly, we have increased the numbers, not as much as what we wanted, but at least we challenged this limited number. And also, it's not a mere number. We have 22 women in the parliament now. Out of 22, 20 from the NPP. None of them are coming from political families, as a legacy of the father or the husband. I think that's a qualitative change that we wanted to make, and we did make. Mm-hmm. This is as a result of our continuous political activism in the ground for more than 2 years, that we started as under the slogan of Gahanu Api Ekamitata, where we started with raising political consciousness of women in the ground. So rather than the number in the parliament, let's say 20 or 22, I think what we value mostly is the activism in the ground level, where women organize things, where women take decisions, women campaign for things, and women organize to talk about the issues in their villages. So there are thousands of women that we don't see in the picture, right, behind the picture. I think that is what we mainly should focus on, where we build this movement from the ground rather than focusing on increasing the numbers. So I think it's organically, it came from the ground and went into parliament as 20. But our main focus is to, yes, we also need numbers. That's one sort of indicator for the to measure the numbers, measure the participation. But what we are mostly focusing on right now as the government is to build the ground layer and more active layer of women. And as you said, now we are facing the local government elections very soon, most probably in May, where we have more women, we can see more women, and unlike, I'm sure this is the case, unlike many of the other political parties who struggle to find women for their list, what we face is we have more women coming in the list. So these days we are finalizing the lists of the candidates, and we have no issue of picking women. That's something I think we should value, the organize in the ground rather than the number in the parliament.
All right. Thank you very much. Ermiza, you're a part of the Feminist Collective for Economic Justice, which is a collective of Sri Lankan feminists working together post the 2022 economic crisis. What have been some of your key observations on the recently unveiled budget in terms of women's protections? Because we can't be expecting women to go into parliament or for women to contest elections when they're in hunger, when their families are in hunger. So economic stability, economic empowerment is a cornerstone of gender equality. Speak to us about how disproportionately women are being impacted.
I think this is a sort of long-term issue, right? It has always been the case that women are disadvantaged when talking about representation and talking about policies and talking about laws in the country. So I think as part of the collective, which really started around the economic crisis happening in Sri Lanka, April 2022, our key reason, sort of motivation for even coming together was to raise issues that women were facing. The policy decisions that were being spoken about, that were being implemented, really did not reach women and were excluding women's experience. So that has really been the call from the collective to ensure that women, who are also a very large part of the informal labor force in this country, who are disproportionately affected when it comes to the austerity measures that have been imposed, particularly the IMF-driven economic changes, policy decisions that have come into the country. So for example, with all of these burdens, women are not doubly but triply really struggling through, and we really need to center that in government policy, in budgets, in all of these things. So we would be looking for that commitment, which is not an easy commitment to make, given that you're already in an IMF program, given that there are already policy decisions in place. But for example, this time's budget, we saw also nutrition for pregnant mothers reduced from 10 billion to 7.5 billion. We saw Triposha 9 billion to 5 billion. So that adds a hardship on women. And so we are saying really as part of the collective's work that there needs to be this radical change in terms of the country's direction, in terms of debt, in terms of economic policy, in terms of how you engage women and respond to women in the workforce as well. We're talking about plantation workers, we're talking about workers in the free trade zones, all of them who really need the support to ensure that their contributions are meaningful, and they are actually contributing so much right now without getting that return, without being able to build their lives. Even with the 2023 Employment Provident Fund the way in which the domestic debt restructuring was used to reduce the future savings that would have been earned, again, women being affected by that. So I think it's not about also cherry picking these policies. It's about looking at that radical change and thinking about women as part of Sri Lanka's economic policies. It's not about women-related policies. It's good for the country when you treat your women in the country well.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Deepanjali, it is women who make up most of the workforce in industries such as garments, plantations, as well as migrant workers. Speak to us about some of the findings pursuant to research conducted by Verite Research on female labor participation, because there are multiple problems in this sphere which women face.
Yeah, for sure. One of the main findings that we have is that the women, the labor participation of women is quite low in Sri Lanka, and this is not something that we see in the country only. It's also the same in the South Asian region. So Sri Lanka significantly ranks low in terms of the female labor force participation. And if I quote some of the data, in 2021 it was just 30.9% of women who was in the labor force, as opposed to 71.1% of men. And if you look at the global picture, according to the 2021 Global Gender Gap Report, Sri Lanka has the 17th largest gender gap in labor force participation as well. So when we have such a low female force labor participation in the country, what does it tell us? There are numerous ways in which the effective participation of women in the labor force is occurring, and there are at least two reasons as to why we should be thinking about increasing this women's participation in the labor force. One, it is a key driver for the economic growth for the country. Now that we have faced an economic crisis, it is absolutely necessary and essential to make sure that the women are able to effectively take part in the labor force. Second, this is also quite a key driver in terms of enhancing women's economic empowerment. We all know how crucial it is for a woman to be economically independent. It only allows the woman to exercise more legitimacy, more self-autonomy, to have more agency, to have that ability to make decisions in the household, because otherwise the woman is always confined to the traditionally assigned roles, and her place is seen as in the kitchen, and the moment she is not contributing to revenue generating in the household, she also doesn't seem to have a lot of say in a lot of the decisions that are being made. So for these two reasons, it's quite important that there should be measures in place to ensure that there is increased women's participation in the labor force. But how can this be achieved? I can also very quickly mention that one key aspect that can be used to achieve this is through the state involvement in ensuring, providing the maternity leave benefits. So right now what we see in Sri Lanka is that, again I'm quoting Verite findings, in the age group of 20 to 40, women are more likely to be unemployed because the private sector finds it cheaper to recruit men in the same age category because they do not have to provide the maternity leave benefits. And we have signed this convention, ILO Maternity Protection Convention 1952 in 1993, which clearly mentions that it should not be the responsibility of the employer to provide maternity leave benefits, but that of the state. And there are about 100 countries that have started providing this, and we are not even close to that. So if you also look at now, Verite has done a cost estimate to see how much the state has to also spend in terms of ensuring maternity leave benefits. So annually, it is only 7.4 billion rupees that will go into providing these maternity leave benefits, and it's quite small in comparison to all of the other welfare schemes and other allocations that you have in the budget. So I think now that we have gathered here to celebrate the Women's Day, it is quite important that we should be able to have at least this measure in place by next year, so that we are talking about effective labor force participation on the part of women, and also ensuring that they are effectively being self-autonomous as well.
Bimali, you represent the UNFPA. When we look at the intersection of gender, ethnicity, class, we find that it is marginalized women who face compounded barriers in the economic sphere. Speak to us about some of the research findings of the UNFPA.
Well, when we see marginalized groups, so UNFPA and the UN as a whole, one of our stand is leave no one behind. So when we think of leave no one behind, we see many women heads of households. In Sri Lanka, 1/4 of the population are women heads of household. And we do not see that recognition coming out in most of the policies. So the other fact is we have persons with disabilities, we have persons of other genders, we have people of different classes, different social strata, and from different areas, geo areas, where development has not been equal in all areas. So we have different areas where we see inequality spread across our country. So our programs actually, with the importance of gender equality work in all our work actually at UNFPA, and this, we spread the access to reproductive health and rights, sexual and reproductive health and rights. So this gives women the choice and access to what they would like to have in their, what they choose in their reproductive health and rights, as well as gender equality, which we promote across all our work. Especially we see the inequalities we feel. Our research speaks to one of the key research findings of the Women Wellbeing Survey in 2019 is that we found out that 1 in 5 women actually have faced intimate partner violence in Sri Lanka, and this is sexual or physical violence. So when we say 1 in 5, that we just 5, and then one of us has faced intimate partner violence. So this is a grave issue. And when we talk of our programs, we speak on prevention and we speak of response as well, as well as policy advocacy. And one of the areas from our findings is, out of those who have experienced violence, most did not seek formal support. That is from the helplines, like we have 1930 helpline with the ministry, we have the police helpline. So only half did access, and of those who did access, 1/3 went to police and 1/5 went to hospitals.
Right.
So our work also supports Mituru Piyasa in the hospitals. We have support with the police, and our most recent one is the emergency waiting areas of 14 police stations of Women and Child Bureau that will be actually open during this month. And we are also focusing on addressing sexual harassment in public transport, which also a UNFPA survey reported 90% of women are harassed in public transport.
Yeah.
And recently when I told this to somebody, and she said, actually not 90, it is 100%. So actually if you take women who access public transport to get to work or to school, girls, young girls, everyone who has accessed public transport would have faced harassment.
Yeah.
So our studies focus on the inequality issues of women in accessing economic well-being, jobs, as well as in your own home, when no one sees you and there is intimate partner violence. So which affects children, and one of the reasons women do not report is because of the children, and also because of shame and our societal gender norms that women do not have the right to say no, and there's an issue in reporting which has a stigma to the family.
Yeah.
So our work talks about behavioral change, attitudinal change. We also work with men and boys because we need to change the way we think and attitude, and also how we respect women and their dignity.
All right. Thank you, Bimali. Professor Piyanjali, women are told to be super women, to balance everything, career, kids, family, and they do it at the expense of themselves. I'd like to ask you to explain to us the psychological toll this has on women when they lose themselves in the process of living, of achieving societal norms? What is the psychological toll it has?
So Sonali, you know, when you were asking me this question, it brought to mind a little video I saw on Facebook some time ago. It really had an impact on me. So it starts with a woman's back. She's wearing a sari and she's waiting for the bus. And then the bus comes and a man comes and tells her, get in. It implies that it's the husband. So both of them are going back home after a day's work. So it's a positive feeling. Then they get down from the bus and they go home, and the man sits in the veranda and tells the wife, can you get me a cup of tea? So she goes there in her sari, gives the tea to him. He's relaxing, taking off his clothes, and she's cooking. Then she tells him, his name Sarat, can you help the children with this homework? I can't. Can you do it, please? I'm tired. So she meekly goes, sits the children down, puts the books in front, and she's cooking. Then she says, Sarat, the dinner is ready. Shall we eat? She's still wearing her sari. And Sarat, of course, had a wash, taken his phone, checked out a few YouTube clips, comes there and says, is this what you cooked? Still again today roti? Can't you do something better? And just gets up and goes to sleep. She is cleaning up. Now, unfortunately, these kinds of media depictions indicates to a wide society of women that you have to bear it. And that's, I think, what the question is saying, that you have to be a working woman, you need to bring home money, you need to look after your children, help them with the homework, cook breakfast, lunch and dinner, get up at 4 o'clock, do the laundry, and whilst you take that load in running the house, it's quite okay if the other partner relaxes because he is tired. So now these kinds of views are really entrenched in us, in our society, in the way we have been parented, which we call socialization. We see it in our families of origin. A little girl child, we see it, that's the way my mother acts. A boy child also sees my mother acts like this, and therefore he will expect it from his partner if it's a heterosexual relationship, and we don't question it, Sonali. And that leads to a concept called self-limiting beliefs in psychology, which are very insidious beliefs that we have about ourselves, about others, and about the world. And we don't even know they exist in us. They're unconscious. We learn it, we believe it without questioning it. And then we start acting as if I have to take the burden of running the house and it is okay. Only a few people will think, should I do it? Is this correct? Should I not be helped? Now, only very few people will have the capacity to think differently. So in certain governments and societies, this insight is given to its people by policies and changing educational structures, where young people are taught to rethink societal norms from younger ages, to think, well, is this right? Is the way our structure should be? Shouldn't both parties help each other? Should it be a togetherness game? And when that happens, societies little by little through the generations start looking at life differently. And then this burden that you said could be changed. But it takes a few generations.
Okay. Thank you very much. I just have one set of questions from the panelists before opening the floor for questions from Nabeksha and Theruni. Ermiza, gender-based violence remains pervasive in Sri Lankan society. We have several statutes which deal with this, the Prevention of Domestic Violence Act. We have other mechanisms. We have the law enforcement agencies. However, the incidents of domestic violence, gender-based violence, continue to be on the rise, and we continue to be reactive, and we continue to be underfunded, under-resourced. We lack sufficient sensitization programs at the police stations, where, for example, if I'm getting beaten up by my husband, I can't go to the police station expecting a rational answer. I can't take my children with me and say, take me to a safe house. I can't go back to my abuser. And this is the reality of a lot of women. We just don't see it. How urgent is it for us to take action? Speak to us. You've done so much work on this area, Ermiza.
It is very, very urgent to take action on this. It is again an example of how women's issues get deprioritized in policies and lawmaking. And I think it's been, as I said before, that way for a long time. And that has made the issue much, much worse, right? Day in and day out, I get these cases. Women who call asking for support, legal advice. And if the entire structure is not being supported and resourced, and if there is no real commitment to ensuring that women are helped, even if we have all the laws, it won't make a difference. For example, I know we have a specific law dealing with domestic violence, which is the Prevention of Domestic Violence Act of 2005. It's been 20 years. We haven't really made a dent in being able to address women's domestic violence. Not just women, but largely women. The act is being used, which is a good thing, but very difficult to move authorities to use it. So most people are also filing private plaints in court and using it. There is also so much difficulty that women face to get to the court. Difficulties of just dealing with the police, trying to make a complaint, not being believed, not being understood, being turned away several times before complaint is recorded. Sometimes even from lawyers, not being believed, being asked, is this true? Then when you get to court, the difficulty of placing that material before court, particularly if it's intimate partner violence, if it's sexual violence, it's really hard to talk about. And our courtrooms are not geared for this kind of evidence taking. That is made an opportunity by also opposing counsel sometimes, or the lawyers who use this as an opportunity to traumatize the victim. So we need an entire set of changes, but at least the changes that have been in the works for a long time. Since 2017, I've been part of a process which was looking at amendments to the current law, which looked at introducing, updating the law to bring in things like economic abuse, recognizing in the home economic abuse, emotional, verbal, psychological abuse, sexual abuse. We don't have marital rape as an offense in this country, but at least as a domestic violence issue, if we can recognize sexual abuse, stalking which happens, cyber harassment, new ways in which for courts, the judiciary, for lawyers who are assisting victims to understand and recognize domestic violence. So it has been important to even get the law to come to a stage where it can respond. But my real grouse with the system is that it's not enough. Every time we even try to do law reform, the first things to get dropped off were the shelters, the actual resources that have to be allocated for support for victims. The support before you get to court, the support once you get to court, the support in terms of safe spaces which women absolutely need to even initiate and start thinking about a court process. You need to be safe first.
Yeah.
You need to know that you have some kind of income, that your economic security is. It is only at the very last resort are people moving to a legal solution. So we need to be making systems that are much broader and committing resources to those systems. And it's well past the time.
What you mentioned, Ermiza, has been exacerbated by tech-facilitated GBV. You also alluded to that. And last year, the world was shocked to hear about the case of Giselle Pellico. And for those of you who haven't, I'll just read a summary. Over a period of 9 years, from 2011 to 2020, Dominique Pellico, a man from France, repeatedly drugged and raped his wife Giselle and invited at least 83 male strangers to rape her while she was unconscious. Giselle, who was unaware of the abuse being perpetrated against her, was raped at least 92 times by no less than 72 men while her husband filmed them. The only reason why this case went to trial so expeditiously and verdicts were meted out was because the evidence was there, the video evidence was there. Deepanjali, I'd like to come to you. Media portrayal of women. We see how violence against women is so normalized and trivialized, whether it be in teledramas or cinema or news reporting, and this normalization is also embedded in religion and culture. We see the silent suffering of victims as being accepted. Speak to us about how problematic this is and how this contributes to gender-based violence, technology-facilitated gender-based violence.
For sure. I think I will speak about the negative portrayal of women, which, exactly as you said, reduces women to sex objects and also normalizes this violence and criminal acts targeting women. All of us now have already dealt with so many issues that the women are undergoing on a day-to-day basis, and the role of the media should be exactly to challenge these, confront these. But what we unfortunately see happening in news media specifically, across TV and print media and also in their respective social media handles, is that women are completely negatively portrayed on a day-to-day basis. And I can speak at least of 5 ways through which this happens, but in the interest of times, I will speak of 3 ways in which women are negatively portrayed, so that it touches upon most of these angles that have been discussed so far. The very first way through which women are negatively depicted is when they are sexually objectified. What do we mean by sexual objectification? This is when the women are treated as sex objects, and also they are reduced to being sex objects where there is no any other meaning attached to them, rather than treating them as for their sexuality, for being quite like being these individuals they are that are there only for sex. That's the kind of perception. Let me explain this at least by using a few examples from the Sinhala print media that we are flagging on a day-to-day basis via our online platform Ethics Eye, run by Verite media division. So one of the examples I can cite is where there was this heading that said, "Beautiful woman under suspicion over the death by suicide of the OIC arrested." One other heading is, "Gorgeous or attractive teacher dies by suicide." Now, what is the relevance of this physical appearance to this specific news item? Plus, do we see instances where it is the physical appearance of men that is also explicitly mentioned like that in news items of this nature? So this is a sexual objectification, and Kaushalya also talked about the women politicians as well, like how there is now, it's no longer from families that they are coming to politics. In 2018, if my memory serves right, there was the provincial council election that was being conducted, and at that time there were a lot of provincial council contestants who were who were actually contesting at the provincial council election, and that included a lot of women from the entertainment industry and other industries as well. And there was this one specific cartoon that was carried in a Sinhala newspaper at the time that portrayed women as sex objects, the clothing and everything, and the line that was mentioned on the top of the cartoon, where they were seen to be saying this to the election commissioner, was that, "Or don't ask us how we found our assets," implying them as sex objects both directly and indirectly. So this is a level of objectification that we see in the news media. And the other way that you also spoke of briefly is where we see so much of trivialization of violence and sex crimes targeting women. So rather than talking about the seriousness of these crimes, what we see is there's so much of sensationalism attached to the news items, and also it goes to the extent of taking that gravity away from that specific incident. Let me again share a few headings from the Sinhala print media that you can easily find on Ethicsai, the Facebook page as well. One is, there was this one specific incident that involved a sexual harassment targeting a woman in a music band, and this is how the heading goes. Guitarist tried to tune the female vocalist inside the bus. Now this tuning of the guitar is the rape or the sexual harassment. I don't think it was rape, the sexual harassment that is being described in the heading itself. And similarly, we see when there are lots of minors who are sexually abused by teachers, there is this very common way of reporting that across most of the Sinhala news media, and that is to say, the tutor who tried to teach a strange English lesson, the strange English lesson being the sexual harassment. And there was one incident about child pregnancy, and how did the heading go? A memorable gift from boyfriend on girl's birthday. So if this is how the news media is reporting these incidents, what happens is all these crimes are normalized, and the women ultimately become these sex objects who can be played around with. That's the perception that is being disseminated, and instead of actually challenging these perceptions, we are perpetuating all of these negative stereotypical perceptions. So now that I'm speaking of the negative stereotypes towards women as well, and we are now a few days away from the Women's Day, there was one woman who became the director of CID in Sri Lanka. That was the first time that a woman came to this position. How did one of the Sinhala newspapers report this? Nobody on earth more skilled than the women to catch men red-handed. It's a natural talent that the women carry in terms of catching husbands' wrongdoings. Now, is this how we should be celebrating these positions? And also, if these negative stereotypical portrayals are happening on a very frequent basis, as pointed out on Ethicsai, what the negative ramifications that all this reporting yields are quite alarming, and that paves the way towards the street harassment and rape and marital rape and all of the psychological trauma. And it also normalizes what parliamentarians such as Kaushalya may be probably undergoing in Parliament as well. One example is that whenever there is this one specific news item on the alleged abuse or harassment in Parliament, how we see it being reported in this specific Sinhala news paper is that it's romanticized by saying that, oh, there is a cupid or there are cupids in Parliament. Is this an act to be romanticized is the question that I have to also
All right,
pose.
thank you very much. Bimali, the UN has been instrumental in setting global gender equality frameworks, specifically with respect to Sustainable Development Goal 5, that of gender equality. What are some of the most significant challenges preventing the full realization of gender equality?
So one of the things is actually more recently, I would say. So we have been able to support with the Ministry of Women, the parliamentarians, especially the Women's Caucus, in putting forward policies. Like the Gender Equality Women's Empowerment Policy was one of the things that UNFPA supported, and now it got cabinet approval in 2023, and it led to also the Women's Commission Bill coming in, and then the Women's Empowerment Act now. So these are very landmark areas that UNFPA, to its technical support, has supported the country. But what we also need is the implementation of those policies. So we have a gap. We have sometimes certain good, very good policies, and also more recently, UNFPA, together with sister agencies, we have put forward the SGBV National Action Plan 2, and with a framework on addressing response to shelters, on ensuring victim-friendly police stations, do no harm. So that principle, as well as prevention. And so one of the things is we don't see that coming to the ground level, and we have to work like with women's groups, men and boys, so that the actual policies reach the ground. There are programs. This is a challenge. And we do work with civil society organizations, we work with Ministry of Women, we work with Ministry of Public Administration, Ministry of Health, and we have key line ministries that we work with, so to take this message of the multi-sectoral response. So if one area on one policy is done, or if we have a certain framework put forward, we need to all coordinate. So sometimes we do not see that coordination happening. There are delays in the legal system, then also gathering evidence for the JMO. So this entire multi-sectoral coordination with a survivor-centered approach, and because most of the women are the ones who are victims, and this is also apparent in the police data with the grave crimes, with the number of rapes, with the number of sexual harassment. So it's apparent. So we need to ensure that our systems are strong in coordinating a proper multi-sectoral approach, where women are dignified with dignity and respect, and they're treated that way.
Sure. Sri Lanka is party to several international instruments, conventions, including the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, or CEDAW. We have a reasonably robust legal framework in Sri Lanka. Dr. Kaushalya, isn't the system pitted against women? Women are facing so many barriers, from access to justice, to delays in justice, to the largely patriarchal structures that pervade the entire system. What do we do? As a parliamentarian, what do you think we need to do as a list of priorities with respect to gender-based violence? Now, we don't have sufficient safe houses. Shouldn't this have been tackled in the budget? Has it been tackled sufficiently?
It has. I cannot say it sufficiently because now we are struggling with all these, IMF conditions and the crisis. The budgetary allocations are not that what we expect, but we at least managed to allocate 25 million rupees for the safe houses for women who faced violence, domestic violence especially, and also we are going to now start a new safe house in Nuwara, where all mostly women from Malayalam Tamil communities come for to get support. But I must say, as Ermiza said, that yes, we need safe houses, but rather than, we need reactive measures as well, but we need proactive measures as well. For example, now our education system, our justice system, it's the best word I could say is that it's a mess. Right, so we need to untangle where the messy things are, and then we need to build this system. I think education reforms take some time, but as short-term measures in the budget, we have taken up this childcare, especially where we allocated 500 million for childcare homes, where women's unpaid care work, and also we need to we have identified the care work as a core of the national economy throughout the budget. I think that is where something we can make a change, recognizing the care work and giving more budgetary allocations for care work. For example, the highest number of allocations went from this budget was for social security first, and then second the health, and the third one was education. So we think that by reducing the care work burden by reducing, the government can support to change the system. I think just making laws, as Ermiza correctly said, won't make any difference, right? For example, as she correctly mentioned, the Domestic Violence Act, there needs to be a system where women can use the laws. We have proposed appointing more women into police stations for the moment, and there will be more recruitments of women, and also women who are speaking Tamil also we need in the system. And also there's a huge backlog of cases. There are around 1,100,000 cases that are pending in the courts at the moment. Now we need to expand the number of courts, and we need to expand the support systems where abused women and children can give evidence without physically coming to courts. That's the law reform is on the way. It's coming soon to the parliament. So there are many things to change, reactive as well as proactive. But I must say that with this budget, maybe this budget is not up to our standards, but we have taken the initiatives to go for a long journey. I think we can improve this over the coming months.
All right, thank you. Naveksha?
So I'd like to start off with Deepanjali, Abeywardana. You were speaking of the fact that the female labor participation is significantly low in Sri Lanka. I'd like to ask you, most often we see that there are training programs conducted even in rural areas, but those are mostly limited to things like hairdressing or beauty culture or stitching and those sort of very stereotyped trainings. Why don't we go into things like getting women involved in the tech industry, or whether it's things like graphic design or AI, or why don't we ever think of going out to those rural areas and trying to get women involved in those kind of sectors as well? Why is it always stereotyped only to those particular set of training programs that each and every rural area sees very often?
It looks like you are actually surfacing a very problematic practice that has been ingrained in the system, because the way people see women is by looking at them in terms of all of this care work, elderly, where they are seen as the ones who should be taking care of the elderly, and also all of these job roles that you just described, which are seen as purely job roles that seem to be done exclusively by women. So what you are surfacing is probably some of these prejudices and problematic patriarchal patterns that have been embedded in the psyche, the social psyche, that need to be definitely flagged and questioned. Because even those, I'm not in a position to talk so much about the trainings as it is out of my scope, but I think this is where it has to be definitely let's say observed and also flagged in the discourse, especially in the media, to show that women's role is not just in terms of these specific traditionally assigned roles, but that they can and they have been doing so much more. So that's a question for policymakers and also for media to challenge these traditionally assigned roles.
How do you think we can give out equal economic opportunities to women as well, especially when it comes to female entrepreneurs? Getting that first little capital is a big problem for them. Getting a loan, because you have to have the assets to even go to a financing institution to get that loan. How do you think, it could be the government or just society in general, how can we make equal economic opportunities for women as well?
I think I would like to speak that from, once again, the maternity leave benefits that I was speaking of, because there are few advantages that we can see when the state is the one that's facilitating maternity leave benefits, and one of them is the burden taken away from the small and medium enterprises, exactly what you're talking about. And when you take that burden away from them in terms of helping the women to come to the labor force, that's through that increased women's participation in the labor force that can be done, where exactly the state can play a very effective role.
I'd also like to ask Professor Piyanjali de Zoysa, we often see these idealized images when it comes to society. This is how you should be as a woman. Even in school,
kids are taught, okay, this is how you should sit like a girl, this is how you talk like a girl. There is an ideal image of a woman. And now in this society with social media and everything evolving, even when it comes to endorsing certain products or whatever, your beauty standards, your skincare routine, everything is so idealized. Like it's very unusual to have something that's out of the norm. How do you think this pressure really is taken on by the current youth, this 21st century, this generation? How is it affecting their way of thinking, their way of, wanting to break these stereotypes, the barriers, and so on?
So I think if you look at evolution theories, for the longest time the human species were living in the jungles, and in order to survive the human species against the tigers, elephants and the pythons, they had to be in very strict roles. So where, if you look at the history of the humankind, so the man goes out there, hunts, brings the stuff, whatever he can find, and the woman cooks, kind of a thing. So this, according to the evolutionary theory, this kind of processes was actually encoded in our system. However, we don't live in the forests anymore, and we don't need those strict stereotypical gender roles anymore. It's very fluid now. But those decades and centuries of training and being decoded into us still persists, and that is why this thing about fair and lovelies and all that stuff. So it's not only in gender, isn't it, male, female, it's all about the color of the skin, things like that, the jobs that you go to, and the classes, sexes, all of that is there. It is actually in one theory that we quote is always evolutionary theory. However, I do feel that people are questioning it now. It's not that they don't. I work in the university. I've been there for 27 years as an academic staff member. I do see young people question it, and it's very encouraging for me, because I come from the state sector, and we get students coming in from all walks of life, from all areas of our country, and people aren't sitting and taking these roles, stereotypes anymore. Of course, we would like it if it is a bit more fluid, but there is some kind of thing. But unfortunately, in our part of the world, where it's not somewhat patriarchal, it's not easy to be different. For example, it's not easy to say have short hair or have a tail in your hair if you're a female, because people question it. They're very judgmental. Yet in the positive side, I think people are questioning it, and we as responsible adults could help our youth to question as well, rather than putting them in the stereotypes that the larger society has put them into.
Ermiza, I'd like to talk to you about something that you mentioned earlier, the informal labor force in the country. Now, the World Bank has categorized the informal labor force as informal employers as well as informal employees. So employers aside, I want to talk about the employees, the female informal employees in Sri Lanka. Given the fact that they are informal after all, talk to me about the legal coverage that they have and the risks that they're exposed to because they are part of the informal sector. And also the second part of the question I'd like to direct to Dr. Kaushalya. Talk to us about the measures that the government plans on taking to protect the women in the informal sector of Sri Lanka.
Thank you for that question. So it really is that the formal sector that is protected with the labor laws in the country, right? So when you look at the informal sector, none of those apply. We do have a situation, for example, with the plantation workers currently, because since about the 2020s, we don't have the collective agreement in place with the employers pulling out. And then the work becomes unprotected. The collective agreement set out what conditions of work were for a plantation worker. How much you pluck, what you would be given as a wage, how it would be calculated, how you resolve a dispute, what your entitlements were, what happens when you have an injury, all of those things, right? At the moment, without the collective agreement, what we're hearing is that you're told as a plantation worker, it's informal labor now. You're on contract basis. We'll give you a piece of land and then you farm that land and you give us a product. Informalization is catching on in sectors that used to have protections. So labor laws are a very important part of a country's legal framework. It ensures that those who are doing work are paid the value of their work and have a decent life. I think with certain sectors, and I'm focusing on the plantation sector because of the gravity of the situation with that sector of workers, right? Not having had a decent wage for a long time, having to fight really very hard to get a very minimum wage. I think the current conversation is around trying to achieve 1,700 rupees a day, which when you multiply by 25 days in the month does not amount to a monthly wage that will cover all of the expenses, given the increases also in electricity, cost of living, things like that, right? So if we are not able to give a person, and in this situation a majority of those workers are women, that kind of living wage, we are in a serious situation where we are literally exploiting their labor. And then using that to say that this is our best product from Sri Lanka, right? I think I heard that being spoken of even in the maiden speech that was given by Dr. Kaushalya. So labor frameworks are not there, and informalization is on the rise. I think it is really important to ensure that when we talk about informalization, that we are also looking at even informal sectors having access to basic protections, particularly health and safety, occupational safety. We know plantation workers in particular, they get stung by bees, attacked by animals. There are injuries where they fall, get cuts because of the plucking. There is no health and safety law that particularly addresses their concerns. No toilet facilities, no place to eat and have your meals. Is this the way we treat? And for a long time, like hundreds of years really, we have not been able to resolve this issue.
Why would you say that Sri Lanka is so behind on this? Why have we not been able to do anything about this really? It's been a really long time since the plantation industry came to Sri Lanka, been around 200 years I believe. Why have we still not done anything about this?
I think we have very initially, it was a community that was disenfranchised, did not have the vote, could not ask for these things that were very important to them as citizens. Now they do, as citizens, able to vote people into power, and also their vote counts, so they're able to ask for things. But still, there is a huge lobby in terms of also the employers that are in these sectors that do not really reasonably permit decent wages. And I think that is something to take into account. The state has a very big responsibility in setting minimum standards with regard to decent wages, with regard to maybe plantation laws that will ensure certain protections, not just plantation laws, but laws for all of the informal labor sectors, right? Maternity, whether it's sexual harassment related in the workplace, many of those aspects of work for domestic workers, basic contracts that can be given, employment provision fund contributions. So we have to start treating workers, majority again women, that are occupying this labor force, basic protections. There's a responsibility of the state, and I think that will help the employers see this as an important dignity, work, labor being a very important issue in the country, and that it provides dignity and ensures that everyone has a basic opportunity to develop their lives and families' lives and educate their children. I think that's what people are looking for.
Dr. Kaushalya, can we hear about the government's plans on women in the informal labor force?
Yes, definitely. Informalization began, I think, with the most of the neoliberal economic conditions that were forced on Sri Lanka with the economic crisis, and also the agreements with the IMF and all. And last year, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was end of 2023, all the new labor laws were introduced. And I'm happy to say that we have halted all these informalization attempts, and at the moment we are reviewing the labor reforms. Especially as a member of the Women's Caucus of the Parliament, at the moment we are reviewing the ratification of ILO, International Labour Organization 189 convention which talks about the domestic workers and how and their rights. So the government will take necessary actions to ratify ILO 189, and also now we have ratified 190, which talks about the sexual harassment at workplace, but we haven't made any specific laws related to Sri Lanka. Therefore, at the moment we had discussions on how do we make necessary laws in consultation with the Labour Department and all other necessary stakeholders. So that's in at the moment it's taken place. And also talking about the plantation sector, I think not only plantation sector but also especially the garment sector is the attempts are being taken to informalize under manpower or something like that we have identified as a big menace at the moment, the manpower. And it sounds like, okay, women, you have domestic work, care responsibilities, so you have the choice to either to go to work or not to go to work. But we actually know the real situation is different. You are forced to take part-time work because of the burden, right? So then you don't want to go to a contract with the employer. Rather, you prefer the manpower services. That is also something we are discussing at the moment, because there was a big misquote that the investors won't come unless we relax our labor laws, which is completely wrong, right? So I think protecting the labor rights is one of the ways we can promote our products to the international market, right? So that's the stance of the government. At the moment we are discussing about the labor law reforms, which we have been opposing under the previous government, and as we all were together in this struggle, so I think I'm sure that we'll have more productive discussions in the coming months, and it's on the move, I must say.
Right, thank you very much. Shifting gears, Ermiza, in Sri Lanka, abortion is illegal unless the life of the mother is at risk. Causing an abortion is a criminal act under the penal code, and conditions where early termination of pregnancy are not permitted are rape, incest, fetal impairment. Now in 2013, the Law Commission of Sri Lanka proposed to provide for medical termination of pregnancy for rape and fetal impairment. However, this was not taken forward. Ermiza, it is the aggrieved woman who ultimately is victimized, who doesn't have access to medical resources, and has to essentially resort to unsafe abortions at a risk to her life. She is the one who has to bear the brunt of the shame of all of the trauma. And the legal system must protect this woman, these women. Why is it not being done? Why are we still having these conversations?
Sonali, you and I are on the same page on this. This is everything that you've been asking me. We have still not done it, right? On all of these law reforms, abortion being one of the important ones as well. Whether it's sexual harassment in the workplace, whether it's marital rape, whether it's child marriage, whether it's on many of these issues affecting girls and women, there is no movement. Not only 2013, when the Law Commission proposed, as far back as 1995, the Ministry of Justice brought a bill to Parliament on abortion.
Right.
Heavily debated, withdrawn by the minister at the time. There is an issue socially where we are still not listening to the women's experience on these issues. That is not what is informing the debate. What is informing the debate is morality, culture, religion, excluding the rights and experiences of the woman. The fact that that exclusion exists everywhere, in society, in our families, in politics, in the work that we do, is why these things don't move forward. And as I said at the very beginning, the kind of radical change that we're looking for is not about these individual pieces. Certainly, if there is a moment to push something through, I think all of us are ready to support that, right? It starts from over 50% of the country being women and them not being taken seriously. It is that political commitment that is necessary by all of us, but particularly by those that come into government, right? And we haven't had that for a long, long time. I think with this particular abortion, so we don't even have the numbers right now of how many people have to resort to illegal means, illegal because the law has criminalized it.
Yeah.
The last available data, about 600 odd a day abortions. Who's listening to these women? Why are these abortions happening? How can we help them? If this doesn't move us, I think it was quite old, the data, but we don't know what the situation is now given the economic crisis, given COVID, all of these things that we have experienced. With more domestic violence also, we don't know what these numbers are. If these numbers don't move us, if these stories don't move us, I don't know what will.
Yeah.
And we keep raising these issues in spaces and getting shut down by those who speak in terms of this is not the time, this is the religion doesn't say so. But there has to be dignity, there has to be safety, protection in religions, in the idea of morality. And I think we're really missing the mark on this.
Bimali, how important is it to have comprehensive sexuality education which is age appropriate, where we educate our children on their bodies, on respect, on consent, on dignity?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think it's extremely important. And working with the Ministry of Education is one of our key priorities. And this has not come out enough at all. And one of UNFPA stands behind this comprehensive sexuality education. It is essential because understanding where we have consent, what we can access, what we can understand, and what is relevant to a certain age, the good touch, the bad touch, coming from the very small classes. If that goes to our children, they would be able to stand up. We are building their agency. We are not asking them to access certain areas, like cyber violence. We have to empower. It begins with our own selves, our empowerment of us and our children and our families and our society as large. But if we don't do that, and it is then always responding when you're having some issue. But prevention lies at the heart of this proposition. So this is very, very important. There have been attempts to really take it forward, but I think the education system really has to incorporate this as a priority.
Bimali, may I direct another question to you now? Maternity health outcomes, actually they vary depending, especially in Sri Lanka, it depends on the geography, the social status, the economic status of that woman. What specific interventions are needed in our country to ensure that every woman is entitled to equal healthcare services, especially when it comes to maternity even across our island, despite their socio-economic status?
So the access to the proper dignified health centers is very important, where a woman is able to access the health facility and treated with dignity and provided the services to the utmost. So what we have is sometimes these vary, and there is sometimes insensitivity because it is a woman's body, it's her health, and it affects the next generation, reproductive health. So we need to really prioritize that, and this is also one area UNFPA works in a huge way, and we have opened several centers in the north. And it's important that when you go, there's confidentiality, there's access, and you should be treated with a very high priority here. And sometimes the part from healthcare workers, from top to down. And one of the things also what was raised is women in those high professional areas who are making the decisions. So that we need to see women in positions of power also making decisions for women. So that we need, because if you take the reproductive, the gynecology, most of the doctors we would see are men. There are very few women, and sometimes even women, like your elderly would say, go to a male doctor. And sometimes the women, they don't have the strength. So we actually put down women without encouraging our daughters and also our sons. Both should be encouraged, but more so our women, because that space is empty. It's very few. So that's very important, and that because there are certain areas that women's health also needs that type of decision-making power.
And regarding this healthcare factor of women, are there any countries that Sri Lanka can take lessons from, any system that we can adopt as a country?
Well, there are many systems actually. I mean, we are actually when we take our health systems, it is not an area we have inequality in the gender gap when we take that for health and also for education. But we know even in our education system there are issues. So when we take health systems, like especially in the Scandinavian countries where welfare state is very high and still remains to be very high, because when we have the more open economy, the capitalist state, there are issues because you have to pay for your insurance. You have to pay for that in a very high level. So they are also feeling the pinch. Whereas the welfare economies are actually where the system is very strong. So this is something we can, because we too have a welfareist economy, but unfortunately with the economic crisis, we are feeling that pinch much more than before.
Professor Piyanjali, now throughout this conversation, we were speaking of the victimhood of women as a result of systemic and societal barriers. If we look at who is causing this victimization, the answer might be the majority, the men. So let's speak about the abusers and abuse. Where in the case of psychological abuse, we may miss some of the signs. Speak to us about how we can empower us and equip ourselves with the knowledge to spot signs of abuse. For example, it might not be a woman getting beaten up. It might be a partner saying, "What are you wearing? Why are you hanging out with him or her? Why do you think you should go for this party? Who are you texting?" So it may be hidden. We also hear of narcissistic abuse, of covert narcissistic abuse, where the signs are so subtle and nuanced that you need to be a psychologist or have a psychologist as a friend or a therapist to know. And this is a very common experience. If we speak among friends, among women, one of them is dating a narcissist. So speak to us about the dangers of this psychological abuse, because the final stage of it is the physical abuse, the sexual abuse, and the coercive control. So if you could just take us through this quagmire of psychological abuse.
So Sunai, there are about 4 kinds of violence against women. There's physical, which we know very well as physical violence, and there's sexual violence, where a woman is forced into having sex even within a marriage, that's violence. Then there's also financial violence. For example, I know people who are close to me who they may be earning money. The moment they come home, the husband takes the money, and when they go to the shop, even to buy a small packet of chocolate biscuits or something, she has to ask permission, but he's in effect giving her the same money that she earned. So that's financial abuse. Then we have psychological abuse, which is also called emotional abuse. Now, emotional abuse is actually a nature of a relationship. While it's physical abuse, sexual abuse, and financial abuse, one instance, this is how we define it, okay, in our therapeutic stance. It's an abusive incident. However, emotional abuse qualifies a nature of a relationship. It happens over time, and therefore whatever, now if you look at physical, sexual and financial abuse, it obviously has a psychological abusive angle to it also. It can't happen without it because it impacts the mind. But psychological abuse is purely impacting the mind. And of course you mentioned about the perpetrator, Sonali. Usually these perpetrators, they are quite unwell in the mind to do this kind of a thing. And you mentioned the narcissistic. Now narcissism or narcissistic personality is a disorder that we diagnose with somebody. Now, but people now tend to use it a little loosely as well. So narcissistic personality disorder is in our categorization where a person feels grandiose, feels entitled, and when their entitlement is questioned by somebody, they get quite annoyed. So if they have a minimum number of criteria, we say, well, he can be diagnosed as narcissistic personality disorder. However, we now use it quite loosely for somebody who might not be coming into that level of a disorder, but has some characteristics which are problematic to people in their life. Now, whether you are with a narcissist featured person or not, let us look at the kinds of psychological violence. There are so many. First and the most insidious and the most scary, I would say, is what we call gaslighting. So gaslighting comes from a movie. I think we spoke about this 2 years ago also, but I think people are very interested in it. I think we need to know because it's quite common. So the name came from a movie that was set in the 1920s. This man, so those days in Europe there was no electricity and people used gas to put the heat up and down. It was winter time and this man really wanted to get rid of his wife. It was not easy. So he thought, let me make her believe that she is mentally unwell. So whenever she used to go to the basement, he used to put the gas down and the lights used to get dimmed in the night and the heating went down. So she used to call to the husband and say, it's really cold here, can you put the gas up? And she says, no, it's not. I'm quite fine here. We can see quite well. I think there's something wrong with you. So over the days and weeks and months, she actually started believing him. So basically, what does therefore gaslighting mean? A person who systematically questions your reality. Now, how does that get translated into our lives? Let me tell you about a person who came to me for therapy. She was saying, she and her husband, they have this SUV, and in the middle there's a center console where the driver and the passenger. So she has opened it, and there was a folded bra, women's undergarment, and she was a bit surprised, like, why is a bra here? And she asked the husband, whose is this? And she took it. I said, it's yours. Then she looked at it. And she said, it's not my size. It's yours. She said, it's not. It's yours. And she said she believed it's hers. When she went home, she put it into her stack of bras. And she kept it for several months. But she said, it's not mine. This is a small size. So that's what you call gaslighting, where a person systematically and very confidently attacks your sense of reality, where you actually start believing things are not there. Now that is a very violent form of psychological violence. Then there are also other ones. For example, if one is in a dating relationship, there's something called love bombing and breadcrumbing. These are very fancy terms for very unusual kinds of violence. So what is love bombing? When a man or woman, usually men do it more, we see it in prevalence terms, suddenly would text you 500 good morning messages, 500 good afternoon. I'm exaggerating, but to get the point across. Flower emojis, lots of love, like bombs of love, until the woman, whether she's interested in him or not, feels flattered and consents to have a relationship. Then comes the second phase of it, which is called breadcrumbing. So breadcrumbs are when we go to say Candy Lake or something, we throw breadcrumbs and the fish comes and eat it, but there are 100 fish and 10 pieces of bread.
The bare minimum.
The bare minimum. So he starts changing the tactic so that now she's hooked, she wants it, now then he starts disappearing from her life or minimizing things. Then comes ghosting. So what is a ghost? Somebody you knew was there, but you can't really see the person. So the person completely disappears from the person's life, and the woman is left high and dry, not knowing what happened to the relationship. So that's another bunch of psychological violence. Then of course there are belittling, humiliating, name calling, and of course preventing a woman from associating with her relatives, friends, and doing what she wants.
Yeah.
So all of that is an entire bunch of psychological violence.
Yeah, and this kind of violence is what leaves women so helpless and hopeless and victimized and susceptible to greater violence of greater proportions. Thank you very much, Naveksha.
Yes, I'd also like to ask you one question. When it comes to things like single parenting, most often than not, women, they think twice before they go for a marriage, because sometimes being a single mom can be a risk, because you don't have that safety. At least women think they don't have anyone to, you know, go back home to. They don't have that, you know, security without a man in their life. Do you think this is actually something that women make up in their minds, or is single parenting actually not as bad as people look at it?
So Naveksha, are you meaning, say, a woman has a child and then goes through a separation or divorce and then moving out in that scenario, or adopting a child as a woman?
Once you go into a divorce and, or a separation, and then you are left alone with the kids.
But I do feel, Naveksha, it is not totally a mind convolution of the mind. I feel that our societies don't really give protection, and I mean, there's a lot of, like, my friends who are single moms, very few of them would say, well, you know, I'm fine here. They feel very vulnerable, because, you know, suddenly you have a bunch of people who come and make a pass at you, who will, you suddenly look at you in a different way, and they do feel vulnerable. And therefore, if they do not have systems to fall back on, because we all need friends and family, you know, we all have times of need, and if that is not there, women do feel vulnerable. And so it's also a societal thing. It's not, so our society, the way they perceive women who are single moms, or even single, or, you know, divorced and single, whatever it is, our way our society looks at such a woman is very unfortunate, you know. So whether you're a single mom or not, our men and even women, you know, look at, because for example, the other day I had a person who was talking to me, and she moved away from her partner because of an extramarital relationship, and she's the number one person who wants her to get together with the husband is her own mom. Forcing her to get back, knowing the kind of violence she went through. So these are very, very entrenched societal issues we have.
Ermiza, you were a member of the advisory committee to the Ministry of Justice on Muslim personal law reform. Policymakers across governments have been reluctant to touch this aspect of legal reform, notwithstanding recommendations from countless committees. We've spoken about this years ago as well. We're still talking about this. Could you, for the 25th time, succinctly set out your key concerns with regard to MMDA reform, and also speak very briefly on how regressive our divorce laws are? They are blame-based, and also the fact that marital rape is still not a crime. I mean, how wild is that?
It's pretty wild. So I keep having to say this. Talking about MMDA, talking about family law reform, right? Let me start with general family law reform for a change. It's the same situation where those laws which relate to women and children don't get prioritized. So we have a general family law system, marriage and divorce, where divorce is still fault-based, which means we can get divorced only if there is one of three grounds. You have to prove adultery, or you have to prove malicious desertion, or impotency. If you can prove one of these three, you will be able to get a divorce in a court of law, which is very restrictive in this day and age, in these times where all other countries have moved ahead and adopted no fault based systems, which means that then you go to court and you say, this marriage is not working out, it has irretrievably broken down, and therefore I'm asking for a divorce. What it means for a marriage to be irretrievably broken down will be decided by court, and it could mean very many factors. The court doesn't go into the question of laying blame at any one individual, which actually makes the process then, if it moves to that system, at least one tries to do that, a less acrimonious process. At the moment, we are really struggling through cases, custody battles in court, maintenance, just to get the divorce, a kind of both violence, verbally, emotionally, financially, which parties are going through, takes up so much productive time and life of an individual. So when that general system is not doing very well, within that general system we find the Muslim Marriage and Divorce Act, which on the basis of grounds of divorce is actually a little better because it doesn't have a restrictive set of grounds. It doesn't have a court structure that has high litigation costs. But the system is very discriminatory towards women. And it's a law coming in 1951. From 1956 onwards, there have been committees recommending reform, as basic as, let's put an end to child marriage. Let's put an end to unfair divorce procedures. Let's deal with polygamy that is causing so much hardship and heartache for women. I've had older women also coming to me saying, I've waited in this marriage for so long, he's had the second and third marriage, I want to get out now. I've waited until my children are older and gotten married as well. And she goes to the Qazi and the Qazi says, nah, you're at this age, you should not need to get a divorce. The unfairness is striking in the face of these women every day. And I think particularly in the north and east, with added issues in terms of being affected by the war, whether it's disabilities, all of that, it becomes even more difficult to get justice. So the Muslim Marriage and Divorce Act is a long-standing issue. Government after government, we have seen no progress except recommendations saying, let's move ahead. We've come to the point, Sonali, that there is a draft bill in the Ministry of Justice at the moment, which was worked on soon after, I think, 2019. There was a committee 2020 that came into place that I was also a part of, and there was consensus across the board. But I think there are still elements within those conservative groups, mostly male dominated, who also have access to power in ways that women don't, that keep scuttling the process. So I think those elements need to be addressed, and some fair laws for everyone. Child marriage is not only a Muslim Marriage and Divorce Act issue. It cuts across all communities, but in the Muslim community it's legal. And I think there can be that broad-based approach to ensure that all children are protected, all families get a good system, a family law that is fair, accessible. We would like to see the general marriage law also become a system where you can access without such high litigation costs, right? We're not even having that conversation yet. We can go to courtrooms that will be conciliatory and not having these very adversarial processes. So that's the dream at this point, but it is a dream that has been long in the waiting, and hopefully there will be movement on that soon.
Deepanjalie, I'd like to direct a question to you. Now, earlier we spoke about how mainstream media portrays women. You gave some examples on how certain headlines have spoken about crimes against women. Let's talk about the cyberspace now, and of course social media, cyber crimes against women to be specific. Would you say that our country's existing legal system, if better enforced, would help us curb this issue or significantly reduce the number? Because even as of now, there's an alarming number of cyber crimes against women. And based on your observations, are there any recommendations you would give regarding cyber crimes against women?
Sure. Looking at the prevalence of cyberbullying, something that we have studied even in 2018 when there was the enactment of the 20% quota for the first time, we saw the prevalence of cyberbullying, to the extent that most of the women who were contesting at the time thought twice before contesting. We saw examples, we saw evidence that they shared with us, and it has not reduced, but it has now become amplified with the frequent use of social media as well. I'm not too sure if it is actually legally that this can be purely solved, because there are way too many angles that can be integrated into addressing this specific issue. On the one hand, it's quite important for people to be educated on how they can be responsible consumers of social media and the digital space. Now, despite the community guidelines that have to be adhered to, what we see is quite the irresponsible behavior on the part of the consumers in the space of social media and all sorts of digital media as well. So one key thing that we have been focusing on, not without completely looking at mainstream media only, is to also generally speak about how to be this ethical consumer. And that's quite important. And going beyond legal measures to educating, it's also quite important that there is empowerment in terms of those who are not only victimized by all of this, but also who see it and remain as passive users without actually taking an action. Now, something that we have seen in the digital media space as well as in the mainstream media space is where there is this parallel between the way women and those individuals from certain ethno-religious backgrounds are portrayed. So the moment you are not from the majority, the speed with which the media labels you as a Muslim or as a woman in a negative context is quite high. So this is a practice that should not be purely addressed through legal measures, but through critical thinking, by really talking about that responsible use of media. And that's why we have Verite Media Division has been looking at not only looking at educating the journalists only, but also the consumers as well. So it's both the demand and the supply side that we should be looking at.
I'd like to wrap up the conversation. I think we've had a chat for about 2 hours almost, and it has been the most insightful and incredible conversation. And it's such a privilege to have this discourse with all five of you. To wrap up, Bimali, what is the future of gender equality? We discussed a multitude of issues that negatively impact women. What more can the government do in collaboration with agencies such as UNFPA, other civil society actors, the private sector? What more needs to be done in terms of a list of priorities? What do you think are the most urgent measures that need to be taken?
Yeah, so I think one of the key things that we mentioned is when we take protection, if we take protection and we take government budgets, one of the priorities is the budget needs to be increased for women's empowerment, women's safety, the shelters. It shouldn't be that the shelters have to reimburse to such a big extent of months. It should, because the running costs are reimbursed. So it should be something that is committed and guaranteed. So this is a very important area. So government budgets across education for women, comprehensive sexuality education, women's health, then addressing gender-based violence prevention in police stations, where I said we have the emergency waiting areas, where women can stay. Because there are many issues that happen at night when you go home. And then they would have issues, so there's a dignified space to stay. Or when a complaint is taken, it takes the whole day. Sometimes when you have to write your complaint, get to the jail, so many areas you have to get your evidence. So there are these spaces. So budgets need to be strengthened for women. Then the policies that we have, such as now the Women's Empowerment Act, needs to be come into place, like the Women's Commission needs to now happen. And it's sometimes since the National Committee on Women kind of was not working to its optimum level, it is where there was no chairperson, so still there is no chairperson. So we need to come, and the policymakers really need to push that area. And also like areas such as when we have services and relational. So one of the main areas is attitudinal, gender social norms. We have to change our attitudes. We have to know that what keeps us behind in reporting, in changing is actually a societal norm. So we need to have embraced gender equality. We need to be able to see women at certain places. Gender parity, we have over 50% women in this country, but we do not have them in parliament. We do not have them as a way of being in heading our organizations. So there is the gender gap. So these have to be closed in the economic field, in areas. So this is very, very important. So I would say those are very important areas.
Thank you. Professor Piyanjali, my question to you is two-tiered. I'd like to ask you, how must we engage men and boys, firstly in demystifying masculinity, in inculcating empathy, community respect? Because if we neglect them, ultimately they become the abusers. And the second part of, well, if you could first answer that.
That's really essential, Sonali, because if we don't really work with the others in our world, it's not really going to work. So I'll just tell you one program that I was involved with, which tried to address it, and we need such programs throughout. So there's a local non-governmental organization called Shanti Margam that was looking at male gender roles and perceptions. So what they did was, in this program, which I was helping them with along with the entire team, was really working with young boys, school boys, through their cricket coaches.
Right.
Because there was a good relationship with these cricketing boys and their coaches, and through the coaches we used cards where we talked about women, like why would you whistle at a girl because she was wearing a slightly shorter dress? So why would you talk to your sister like that? So the cricket coach basically has discussions with his two pupils while teaching cricket, but on querying maladaptive, perceptions about women. And in this intervention study, this has been done in South India and in the US, we use the same protocol. We found that the young boys who were in this group, actually the way they started viewing women as rather objects really changed.
Right.
So what we really need is really one-to-one programs. This awareness is perfectly fine, large scale, but really going in and targeting the community at the periphery and working with them to really shift these perceptions, because they're very entrenched. So that is essential, yeah.
Yeah. And the second part of my question is, Professor, for women, rest is resistance. To let go of this conception or the need to do it all, to be it all, to rest, to sleep, to paint, to sing, to dance, to laugh, to just be. And that is such a beautiful thing. And we take it away from our girls as they grow up. Speak to us about how we need to center our own selves, to the need to romanticize our own lives.
I think, Sonali, actually if you look at the world, most people can't be. They're on the go all the time. So it's a very achievement oriented, extremely worldly society we live in. So into that equation comes the woman who the society has really forced certain ways of being. So therefore we have a larger society where people are going. They can't rest and recuperate and enjoy what life gives in our very short life we have in this birth. Then there comes a woman who has been generationally told that you need to deliver, like that advertisement I told you about, Man could still rest, but you need to clean, do the laundry, everything. So how do we overcome it? I think to really sit back and question yourself. Is this the kind of life you want to live? Or would you, when you're getting older, would you like to look back and would you think this is a rushed life? And to really question that. is this what you really want? And when you're older, to really be disappointed that you didn't smell the roses, you know. So it's actually our own journey. And as a woman, if we live differently, the younger women around us, knowingly or unknowingly, we see a different way of living. We act as role models. So it's a very deep, tedious journey of questioning ourselves, because we can say all this, but ultimately the perception shift comes with our own self-work. Am I making myself
Absolutely
clear, Sonalia?
Yeah. Deepanjali, we need to move from damaging portrayals of women in media to centering more gender equitable and respectful portrayals of women. How do we go about doing this?
Yeah, it's actually not that difficult if the media starts also focusing on ethically reporting on media. Now, this is something that's applicable across all of the media, and what we've seen is so much of sensationalized news that may be probably targeting the viewers and getting their newspapers circulated or TV channels being most watched. But ultimately, if the globally accepted media ethics are the ones that can be respected and also can be adhered to, that's exactly the way through which you can very easily achieve this positive portrayal of women, and by shedding all of the prejudices and the negative stereotypes associated with women. So that's one way, but there's something that's quite critical that I think which is coming across from all of these remarks that are being made, that is education. That's in the education system, this is in the civic education. This is all about giving our children and all those who are going to be the future generation the ability to critically engage, critically think, and not to fall prey to all of these prejudices and negative stereotypes that have been inculcated over the years. So that's something that can be very easily, not easily, but that has to be quite promptly challenged through the education system. But what we have to achieve through media is something that can come from media itself. So by having this two-pronged approach, it may not be that difficult probably to have that safe environment where women can go on the street at night without getting harassed and without getting psychologically or financially abused, and also to have that dignity that has also been discussed all this time. So let's look forward to that.
All right, thank you. Ermiza, how must we look to solutions for the issues that we raise, that you have worked on over countless years, issues that others have worked on? What must we do? I mean, I don't even know how to pose this final question to you, because solutions aren't forthcoming. It's not linear, and it's quite disheartening.
I can relate to the frustration and the feeling of being disheartened. I think more and more I'm convinced that the solutions for the country is just looking to the experience of women.
Yeah.
Women in different vulnerable categories and women's lives. If we address those issues, many issues that we raised around the table today, we're actually looking at solutions for the country. If you look at women's work, you're looking at labor in the country. If you're looking at family laws, you're looking at happy families, partnerships in the country that are also ensuring that there is a population that is contributing, that is engaged, that is developing. If you look at social protection, which is something that the country looks at, you're also looking at women's double burden. You're looking at how women are provided for and protected, and therefore a solution is re-looking at social protections in the country. One of the things that we've been really pushing is universal social protections, right?
Hmm.
Look at women and their conflict experience. conflict-affected women are talking about transitional justice, talking about accountability, talking about reparations, trying to find answers for the missing loved ones in their lives. There is so many of our country's solutions reflected in the experiences of women. They are raising this in the most difficult circumstances, where they are shouted at, where their voices are crushed, their protests are not allowed, their raising it means that they will be critiqued publicly, shamed publicly, harassed over social media. The experiences of women gives you an understanding of how difficult half the population is finding life. And I think getting out as a country into something that is more feasible. So we're looking actually in terms of constitutional reform. It is that big a deal. We're looking at a place where we can have a constitution, Article 16 being repealed, so that an judicial review of any law being possible in the country, post-enactment judicial review, so that women and any other vulnerable person can go to court and say, this law is not working for me, I want to change it. So it starts from as high a thing as the constitutional reform, moves into decriminalizing women and what they do, so their identities are criminalized, what they do is criminalized, whether they have abortion is criminalized, and then looking at protections. Social, universal social protection is that thing that holds that net up, that makes sure that people who fall below can be raised up as a country. I know it's a frustrating experience, and I don't think we give up. I think that's what we've been doing around the table, right? Not giving up. And there is going to come a day, I can really feel some of the changes that have happened even in my lifetime, which I've always said, I'm doing this work and maybe I might not see the changes. But I've seen MMDA amendment bill. I've seen a domestic violence amendment bill. I've seen some changes in attitudes and perception, some understanding of what parental alienation means by others who are working in this field. There's a lot of work to do, Sonali. And I think we all have to be up for it, and we have to ensure that the next generation coming in are doing more than what we are doing, that they have a platform to build on. And I think that's, it's good work, it's work that is encouraging, and I refuse to be frustrated by the enormity of the problem.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Kaushalya, last year when you were a participant of Face the Nation, you were a rights advocate. Today you're a member of parliament, you're a policy maker, and you have an overwhelming majority in parliament. Given the countless issues that were raised, where women bear the brunt of the burden, where women face violence in the home, at the workplace, in society, in courts, due to the justice system delays inter alia, and elsewhere, online, women are bearing the brunt of these burdens. Even the religious sphere, policing of women. What actions will you undertake to bring to light? Speak to us about, firstly, the MMDA reforms. Your government has made a few statements about this. So I'd like to ask you, on behalf of the government, could you give an undertaking that at least the recommendations will be looked at and implemented? At least this government, countless other governments were afraid to touch it.
Definitely. I think on our very first Women's Caucus meeting, just by speaking about child marriage, how much women's minister got attacked on social media. And even before the election, we have been advocating for MMDA reforms and also against child marriages. And it's, as you said, it's not only a Muslim issue, it's about children and our responsibility, our international responsibility towards CEDAW and CRC, the Child Rights Convention. So we are looking at the larger women's issues, but we continuously get attacked by the nationalist, religious, fundamental groups. And for example, after my maiden speech where I mentioned MMDA, I got maybe at least 50 phone calls, some are like threatening. But we have made it clear, our stance. We don't have to start from the scratch. There has been a lot of work already done on this issue. There were a lot of brave activists, including Ermiza and many of us here, that who have already worked, and then there were attempts made by the governments. So we are now in, our plan is to take the work that is already being done and made a round of consultations and decide what are the immediate possible law reforms. We haven't taken a decision as to these are the reforms that we need to take, but we have opened the discussion and we have already had some discussions with certain parties. So it's in the progress.
Will there be public consultations as well? Or will public be able to send in their observations?
Yes, there will be, and also with the, as Ermiza said, what was missing here, the women's voices in these consultations. We always don't take it seriously.
Yeah, because religious leaders can't be making decisions on women's bodies.
So that's what we are planning to do. I can't say a timeline right now, but it has already started.
All right, and also marital rape is still not criminalized.
Not yet, but this is also in our agenda. And there are several law reforms that I would like to also add. I mean, since we are wrapping up, to answer Naveksha's earlier question about the economic burden and how this money has been lost in somewhere else, not going to women. So one of our key position is that without economic empowerment, no equality or equity can be guaranteed. So it's a center. It's like the cake, and the ideological and other social cultural barriers are like the icing. So we need to address the economic inequality first and economic equity. Therefore, we have suggested several proposals from our budget. One of the key highlights is the rural economy, which is kind of a center of our policy. And we have proposed, like just one example, like for women who have no access to land or other capital, we have proposed and we have started the discussions with the ADB at the moment to give capital for entrepreneurship, for loans for their businesses, as undertaking their proposal as the capital, not necessary to have a land or jewelry or vehicle to be pawned. So that's just one simple example that I'm giving. And also we have found that there are a lot of money pumped into divisional secretariats for women's empowerment and training, but they have been lost in like one day cake making training and one day dressmaking or makeup training, and nothing has happened. There's no market. So we have specifically proposed how women can access to market. We have announced a week for women this in the upcoming Women's Day, but this week our main focus is to access to the market and production. So that's I want to highlight. And lastly, that we have several policies, as I think Bimali said at one point, that we have women's national action plans to address GBV and national action plan for women, peace and security, but the most important thing is the implementation. That's where the lacking. There are nice, lovely policies, but no, not in practice. That's something we are concerned of. And wrapping up, I would like to say now, every year during March, we come and talk all these questions, problems in a round table. I have been doing it, but my hope, with ending with a positive note, as Ermiza said, that we have no time to be frustrated. We have a pile of issues to deal with. In the next year, we might not be able to solve all the problems in the country in 1 year, but at least my sincere hope is to come next year and talk about the government's progressive journey. I think that's my sincere hope, and all of us, I guess. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you very much to all our fabulous guests. Dr. Kaushalya Ariyarathne, Member of Parliament. Also Professor Piyanjali de Zoysa, Clinical Psychologist, also Senior Professor, University of Colombo. Deepanjalie Abeywardana, Head of Verite Media and Deputy Director of Verite Research. Bimali Ameresekere, National Program Analyst Gender at UNFPA, and Ermiza, Tegal, Lawyer and Rights Advocate. Thank you also to Naveksha and Teruni. Thank you for watching us. This was such a fabulous discourse. We remain hopeful. And to all the women watching us, Mary Oliver said, "You must not ever stop being whimsical, and you must not ever give anyone else the responsibility for your life." Thank you for watching us. Good night.